Donald Trump announced new strikes against the Russian Federation, but what does this actually mean? Trump confirmed on camera today that he's ready for the next phase of sanctions against Russia. This appears to be a political signal. With diplomacy stalling, it's time to pressure the Kremlin financially. In practice, this means speeding up the work of the United States Treasury and trying to close loopholes for Russian oil through third countries. But we shouldn't jump to conclusions here, because tomorrow Trump won't impose anything against Russia. There will be no sanctions against the Russian Federation from Trump tomorrow. This is another long-term game, because the nearest window when Trump is ready to impose secondary tariffs against China for buying Russian oil is only at the end of October, when Trump is ready to meet with Xi Jinping in South Korea. Although it's also worth noting that on September 8th, Trump will host the Europeans in order to really synchronize sanction pressure against Russia and its allies. I'm Alexei Pichi. Let's analyze this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like this video, leave any comment under this episode, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pichi News. The link to it is in the description of this video. So, the logic of Donald Trump's new statement is as follows. Scott Bessent, who is Donald Trump's finance minister, has already set the markers. Buyers of Russian oil may face 100% secondary tariffs. Congress can raise this limit to 500%. And, to put it in plain language, if China doesn't want to pay the American tariff, China shouldn't buy Russian oil. The very fact that these numbers are made public is a warning to India, China, and all traders operating in the shadows. Of course, one could argue that Donald Trump's words are just more empty talk. We've heard his threats often, and Trump has made himself seem like a blabbermouth who repeatedly promised to strike Russia, but then backed down. But to assess the strength of this move, let's recall a recent event. After the Anchorage meeting with Putin, the White House tried to push through a negotiation track. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated in June that new sanctions aren't coming yet. The White House believed that pressuring Russia with sanctions would make the Kremlin uncooperative. And the logic was, if we don't pressure Putin, then Putin will be ready for dialogue. It didn't work out. Russia showed its true face. And as long as it doesn't get slapped hard and tough, it's not just unwilling to have a dialogue, it gets more brazen and spits in Trump's face. Russian strikes on Ukraine have only intensified, and no peace talks are even being discussed anymore. But it's important to understand that the window for this second phase from Donald Trump regarding sanctions against Russia opens specifically in the fall, unfortunately, in late fall. And that's not a coincidence. Publicly, it looks like Donald Trump's political patience has run out. Economic pressure is returning. In practice, things are much more mundane. It's just that at the end of October, events are expected, which is why Donald Trump is making loud statements about the second phase of sanctions against Russia and its allies. What will it look like in reality? Well, first, secondary sanctions on countries that buy Russian oil. This isn't an embargo, it's more like a surcharge for buying toxic oil. Second, it's the expansion of the content delivery network lists, which now include banks, insurers, and carriers, especially targeting Russia's shadow fleet. Third, it's focused strikes on logistics, insurance, and port access. At the same time, there's a so-called carrot for those who switch from Russian Urals oil to alternatives. The United States aims to boost oil production. Middle Eastern countries already are, the market knows this, and risks are rising in the Black and Baltic Seas. Tankers are getting more expensive, and Urals is being sold at a big discount. And here we come to the most interesting part. Where does China fit into this? In the previous episode, we already put a big period on that. Without Beijing, secondary sanctions are just a loud statement and nothing more. With Beijing, these secondary sanctions become a real noose. If at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit they agree at least not to expand China's purchases of Russian oil, or to tighten compliance among Chinese traders, the Kremlin will feel it in the January revenues. If not, then this phase 2 of Donald Trump will be loud but empty. Let me explain. At the end of October, Trump will attend the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in Korea and meet with Xi Jinping. We'll only hear about real steps on secondary sanctions there, not before. Speaking of politics, Trump is trying to close the media wound of Mir Alaska. If not, we turn on the money. Moscow will play as usual and declare that no sanctions will scare us. But in fact, this is already hitting Russia. In addition, the armed forces of Ukraine are actively destroying oil refineries in Russia. These are, our sanctions against the Russian Federation. For the United States and European Union economies, they must pressure the Kremlin's treasury while avoiding harm to the gasoline and diesel market. India is openly supplying Europe with petroleum products made from Russian oil, so pressure is needed. Europe also needs to shift its own supply sources. Here, Allied coordination would resolve everything: flow distribution, quotas, insurance, etc. Security: Russia will respond asymmetrically, from global positioning system jamming in Europe to attempts to disrupt Ukrainian energy in the winter. This needs to be taken into account in advance, and the market is already factoring it in. The consequences. For Ukraine, it's a chance to turn the Alaskan flop into something real. This is a limitation for the Russian budget. Less foreign currency means fewer missiles and drones for Putin. That's why we must pressure American diplomacy. With just one message, Putin spat in Trump's face, who had applauded him in Anchorage. The European Union and the United States will face a tense but manageable winter in energy if secondary sanctions are targeted rather than broad. For the markets, there is nervousness about shadow tankers, rising discounts and insurance costs, but no panic if the ATS brings a signal of a tariff pause between the United States and China. Conclusion. The second phase of sanctions against Russia under Donald Trump is not just a slogan, it's a choice and a set of levers. But unfortunately, the power of these levers is in Beijing's hands. If Beijing listens to Trump's calls, it will be painful for the Kremlin. If not, it will be a long game of nerves. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.